covered many, many court cases over many years, but I have never heard a judge sound quite as emotional as talking about Sara. And obviously, we've had these stories before. Baby P, Victoria, Columbia. We've heard these stories before. It should never happen again. But it does keep happening, doesn't it? So let's talk to Peter Williams now, Director of the Family Education Trust. Thank you very much for joining me today, Peter. Peter, justice appears to have been done. Sense has been seen. But Peter, the question on everybody's lips is, why does this keep happening?
Well, I think the answer to that, very sadly, is a failure of safeguarding because of a misplaced attitude towards cultural integration. We know from this case that, unfortunately, Sara had a hijab on, and so in many cases her bruises were not found because of that hijab. She was covered up. And actually not just that, but also catching the fact that, again, the father was somebody who had engaged in violence against women. There needs to be targeted noticing of these kind of facts, and therefore a kind of integration where we say, if there's a history here, maybe even if there is a cultural history within particular communities, then we do need to have heightened awareness and heightened approaches to child safeguarding so that we catch these kind of issues before they become something as horrifying as this.
We do have a long and very, very sad list of children that have suffered in this way at the hands. I mean, you know, Baby P, we can all remember, Victoria, Columbia, you know, Nubia Baroma, Angelica Casilla. There's a list of names going back decades, and nothing seems to be done. I was listening to a social worker being interviewed, and she's saying, we are so snowed under. We can't cope. Our hearts break with the case studies we have to deal with, but we can't cope as well. So there's something going horribly wrong, and what needs to be done to stop another child suffering this awful, appalling fate?
Well, aside from what I've already said, I think also that the fact that we underfund our social services as well is something that needs to be looked at. Simply resourcing is a fundamental problem. Even in the legal system itself is chronically underfunded. And so justice cannot happen when you have a system that cannot take these kind of cases to the degree that they exist. So there's a wide number of things that need to happen here. My concern, actually, is that there will also be another misplaced attitude, which is rather than engaging in those kind of really difficult questions with regards to resourcing and integration, we're going to blame people who homeschool. Because one of the things that did happen in this case, of course, there was homeschooling. But if you look at the results of those children who are homeschooled, they're actually better than those who are state schooled. I mean, there was a 2017 systematic review which found that 78% of peer-reviewed studies found that children do better when they're homeschooled rather than when they're state schooled. And so clearly it's not the problem here, that the variable here is not homeschooling, which I think some people want to go for. We saw The Guardian go after homeschooling as a kind of result of it. No, it's not homeschooling. The issue here is the failure of the system to deal with a number of cases that exist, and to particularly, due to misplaced political correctness, actually engage in the difficult question of cultural integration. Unless we deal with those questions, these things are going to continue happening.
This is the other debate. Well, there's a couple of debates that have been prompted by it. One, as you say, homeschooling. The other one, the laws around smacking. But Will Forster, MP for Woking, said that an inquest into Sara's death should examine if concerns over cultural sensitivities meant that teachers were afraid to question why she suddenly began wearing a hijab. Her stepmom didn't wear a hijab. None of her siblings wore a hijab. I mean, questions should have been raised then. But are teachers, understandably these days, worried to say something in case they're accused of being racist?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. And this is the problem, that political correctness or wokery or whatever we want to call it chills discussion, and it also chills the proper functioning of child safeguarding. And there is nothing more important than safeguarding. I mean, literally, that teachers, I'm the chair of the Board of Governors of a nursery school, and the thing that is often on our minds is there is nothing that we do that is more important than safeguarding. And if there is any kind of social attitude throughout the system that is undermining that or that is retarding that in any way, that needs to be fulsomely addressed. But unfortunately, there are far too many people in the country who don't feel self-confident enough to do that, because the smear of being called a racist or of being called anti-Islamophobic or whatever it is, that trumps in many cases their concern, because they've got to think about their livelihoods, they've got to think about their reputations. Unless that's sorted, then the system cannot function and work. You can have all the safeguarding policies in the world that you like, but unless people are willing to implement those policies without favour, then it simply won't work.
Yeah. Peter Williams, Director of Family Education Trust, thank you very much for joining us to discuss an incredibly hard story. And obviously children, I mean, I think, you know, as Peter alluded to, you know, children are suffering at the hands of people who are worried, accused of being racist or accused of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Peter Williams, Director of Family Trust, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.